Joining us today is Richard Holber of the Consumer Federation of California, one of the many consumer groups that are urging regulators to revise this flammability standard for car seats. Now, Richard, you were very involved in the furniture and revising the furniture flammability standard. You saw what happened there. Lawmakers didn't really push them. What would you ask the DOT if you had the opportunity to ask follow-up questions?
Well, I think I'd ask the Department of Transportation, why have they buried their heads in the sand for decade after decade, given all the scientific evidence that these chemicals don't stay inside the furniture but migrate into our bodies, particularly the bodies of infants and toddlers where they cause tremendous harm? I'd ask why they have ignored the pleas and scientific conclusions of fire safety experts and firefighters that this standard is not effective in stopping the spread of fires.
So you worked a lot with the furniture flammability standard that was recently revised here in California. That also required an open flame test, similar to the one that is required in car seats. It's since been revised. It no longer requires an open flame. So what did you think when Secretary Fox said that the NHTSA regulation, the regulation required for cars, didn't, quote, require flame retardants? He's saying, well, our standard doesn't say they have to use flame retardants.
Right. Literally speaking, he is correct, but there's only one way to pass this test, where they rip open the cushion and expose it to a direct, like Bunsen burner kind of flame for 15 seconds, and that is to saturate the material with toxic flame retardant chemicals. So the manufacturers feel there's no option except to load the product with flame retardants to pass the test.
And I know that some folks will say, well, there are other materials they can use, but we actually tested some of the alternative materials, and when you expose them to an open flame, they also ignite, so they wouldn't pass NHTSA's very specific test. So we should explain that some of the most commonly used flame retardants in car seats and furniture are known to cause cancer. And as Richard mentioned, they're also found in high levels in kids who are exposed to them. These chemicals can break down and migrate into dust, which kids inhale and ingest by sucking their thumb, things of that nature. Now, fire scientists say NHTSA's outdated test and flame retardants added to pass it are irrelevant in a real-world fire because the test uses a 1-inch flame. Experts say real car fire flames are too big for flame retardants to be effective, and NHTSA tells us it has been aware of these concerns since at least 2013. That's when California's furniture flammability standard was revised. And again, that standard was very similar in terms of its test to the current car standard, and as a result required flame retardants in furniture for many years. So Richard, are you surprised that only now is NHTSA beginning this, quote, 2-year research plan when the standard has been in effect for 44 years and regulators admit they've never even tested it in car seats to see if it's effective?
I'm not surprised, and that's because of the power of the chemical industry to intimidate and browbeat regulators. And it was only after their tactics were exposed in California that things changed. And I think similarly, it's only because of the work you've done exposing this problem with the Department of Transportation standard that they now must deal with reality. But it's impossible to really understate the power of this industry to frighten regulators and elected officials into doing nothing.
Well, I will tell you, at least with our investigation, I am not aware of the chemical industry input when it comes to this flammability standard. We should note that the chemical industry insists flame retardants save lives and they provide valuable time to escape. And I know they were very active in the fight against reforming the furniture flammability standard, which of course would no longer require these chemicals in furniture. So ultimately, you know, there is the argument that these chemicals can slow down a fire and they could save lives. So why did state regulators eventually decide to change the furniture standard? How do you think that relates to cars, and how did the chemical industry respond to that push?
Well, there were bills in the legislature that they succeeded in defeating year after year after year. They spent $20 million or more to stop legislators from changing these rules. In fact, these are not effective fire safety rules. There are better rules.
Tell me about this that we're looking at right here. So this is a flyer that that you gave us that you say that the chemical industry sent out to folks.
Yes. So this was in 2007, Senator Leno, then a member of the State Assembly, was moving legislation to change the standard. It got to the Senate. I actually lived in one of the districts where I received this mailer at my home. It looked like a political mailer. It made this hysterical appeal: call my senator before he commits a deadly mistake. Babies will die if he votes for this bill. And none of that was fact-based, but it's hard for lawmakers to say to constituents, oh, gee, I want babies to die. Now, it has nothing to do with reality, but it worked.
Right, and so we should know that that bill was one that was introduced early on in the push to reform California's furniture flammability standard, and it didn't pass, right, initially because of that?
That's right, it was killed, and bill after bill after bill was killed.
And ultimately it was the governor who, basically it was an executive order from the governor to revise this standard because they couldn't get it passed. And you say that's because the chemical industry, their lobbyists were so strong that they were never able to get a bill through?
That's correct. They browbeat lawmakers. They used intimidation tactics, just as they use those tactics against the manufacturers who don't want to use these chemicals, but they feel they have no option.
Right. Now, I should probably defend the industry since they're not here to defend themselves and say they probably wouldn't classify it as browbeating. They would be supporting their opinion, which I genuinely believe. I think they believe that these definitely do provide fire safety benefit.
Well, okay, but here's what happened. They did lots of very, very devious and I think immoral tactics. It came to a head when they brought a doctor. He was an eminent burn doctor from the University of Washington who testified on 3 separate occasions how he held a dying 7-week-old baby in his arms who was horribly disfigured because that baby was burned because of lying on a pillow that was not treated with chemicals, flame retardants. Well, thanks to an expose by the Chicago Tribune, they did a phenomenal expose. They actually interviewed the doctor. They forced him to finally concede. He said, well, I was not under oath. He made up the story. It was completely fabricated. That doctor has since lost his license to practice, and I think that was the final straw that got the attention of the governor and others who said, finally, enough is enough. We cannot allow these kinds of tactics to prevail.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. A lot of information. We could go on and on, but we have a lot more news to get to. So I'm going to thank you, and we're going to toss it now to Andrea with sports.